You are listening to the Live Well with Arthritis podcast, helping you to live a healthier and happier life with your arthritis. Every episode contains science-backed support, expert advice, and a deep understanding of the reality of living with arthritis. I'm your host, Emily Johnson, also known as Arthritis Foodie. I'm a best-selling author and the founder of Live Well with Arthritis. Whether you've been living with arthritis for years, or you're navigating a new diagnosis, or perhaps you have symptoms and are looking for answers, this podcast is for you. For more support, you can join the waitlist for my course, Live Well with Arthritis, on www.livewellwitharthritis.com/waitlist. That's www.livewellwitharthritis.com/waitlist. Places are limited, so the earlier you sign up, the better. Now, let's get into the episode. Tanya Freirich is a registered dietitian nutritionist, a certified diabetes care and education specialist, and the founder of the virtual practice, the Lupus Dietitian. Based in North Carolina, Tanya brings more than a decade of experience and a master's degree in nutrition to the autoimmune community. But her expertise isn't just academic, it's deeply personal. Having lived with autoimmune disease for over 20 years, Tanya managed to eliminate her own flares by transforming her diet and lifestyle, even when she was already following what most would consider a healthy diet. Today, she empowers others through her one-to-one counselling and her signature group programs, the Lupus Breakthrough and the Lupus Solution. And much like myself, Tanya is a firm believer that you are an expert in your own body. She is committed to an inclusive, anti-oppressive approach that honours your culture, your cuisine, and your unique journey towards health. Tanya, I'm so thrilled to have you here. And before we start, please could you share with our listeners what lupus is and your journey with the condition leading to the work that you do now?
Absolutely. So lupus is an autoimmune disease. That's the easiest definition. However, it is also known as the Great Imitator because it has such a long list of symptoms that get confused with so many other autoimmune diseases or infections, causes of inflammation. So unfortunately, the average time in the United States from the onset of symptoms to diagnosis for many people is 6 to 7 years. Because it is so confusing, you need to see so many specialty doctors. I think the average for most people is between 3 to 5 doctors before they receive a diagnosis, and it waxes and wanes. So the inflammation, the symptoms of lupus may be very, very bad in a flare. At one point, you've scheduled your appointment for the doctor in a month and a half, and when you see the doctor, you're already feeling better. So it can be difficult to track, to diagnose, and certainly to live with if those symptoms and flares are really not well controlled.
Absolutely. And what about your own journey with lupus? How did that come about, and how long have you had lupus for?
Yes, so I have had a lot of experiences with other autoimmune diseases, and many people out there will really feel this resonates with them as well. So my first diagnosis was years and years ago in my teens, and then every couple years I would get a new diagnosis, a new set of symptoms. Lupus was now more than 11 years ago in my late 20s, and at that point I was already a registered dietitian. So I thought, okay, I thought I was eating healthy. Let me just fine-tune my approach specifically for lupus and see how much better I can get feeling if my diet really supports reducing that inflammation. Because my first flares with lupus were really intense muscle and joint pain, terrible fatigue, rashes. Of course, that one is one of the hallmark signs that actually helps people get diagnosed faster because it's on the cheeks as a butterfly rash and very distinctive. And I was just struggling. I couldn't use my hands, much like rheumatoid arthritis. They were very stiff, very sore. It was painful. And I lost all my grip strength. So I felt as though my quality of life had been very abruptly impacted. Whereas previously, I had been training for a half marathon. I was super active. I worked a lot of hours at that point in my life. But I wasn't bothered by it. I kind of had the energy and the enjoyment of those things. So when I was diagnosed with lupus, it was definitely like, everything comes to a screeching halt. But I did find with diet and lifestyle changes, and of course, working with my doctors, getting the actual proper diagnosis certainly helps in terms of treatment plans, that I was able, over the course of months, over the course of basically a year and altogether, get everything calmed down. And I've been able to maintain the symptoms and flares in remission now for more than a decade.
That's incredible. And what a journey that you've had as well. And for those listening, lupus is obviously an autoimmune disease. How does it link with things like rheumatoid arthritis and chronic
Mhm.
inflammation and sort of the umbrella of systemic inflammation? How do they link together?
Absolutely. So there is essentially a lot of ways that lupus can affect our body. There's B cells, there's T cells, cytokines, which are kind of inflammatory markers. And essentially, if you were going to sum it in one sentence, the body in all of those cases has lost the ability to distinguish self from non-self. So it starts waging an attack against your own self, thinking, uh-oh, this is an invader. I must be on high alert. And so that autoimmune activity is your immune system in overdrive, kind of freaking out. Yeah, and doing damage, because we want our immune system to damage viruses, infections, but we don't want it to damage our own cells. So not only is your body wasting a lot of energy mounting this attack, also then you have to heal the damage you've done to yourself. So it is kind of a double-edged sword of you're wasting a lot of energy and resources in one way, and then also needing a lot of energy and resources to undo that damage.
Absolutely, yeah. And so how does a whole body approach to this, so looking at sleep, stress, joy,
Mhm.
not just the nutrition, sort of actually complement the nutrition in terms of that inflammation and that inflammatory load?
Absolutely. So if we think about our whole life, let's say in 1 week's time, yes, we certainly have, let's say, 21 meals in a week. We have 7 nights of sleep. We have a lot of opportunities for movement, and unfortunately, a lot of opportunities for stress. And so each one of those components and many more are affecting how our body is doing day to day. So if we're getting enough sleep, fantastic. We've given our body more energy to do the healing. If we are moving our body in a way that feels great, wonderful. That's good for our heart health. It's good for circulation. It also helps reduce inflammation to move our body. Obviously, not push too hard. Sometimes people really struggle with that, especially if they were very active before. Um, and also, of course, what you're literally feeding your body becomes your cells. Like, I think people really forget that our whole body is constantly replacing different parts of itself. So your skin now, unfortunately, is not your baby skin from however many years ago. We have to replace those cells. Our hair falls out, we replace it. So those building blocks are coming from our food. And if we nourish ourselves with all of the building blocks that we need, great. We've equipped our body with the tools that it needs to do its best, even in a setting of adversity.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it, where you literally are what you eat. Like you
Yes,
quite literally are
absolutely.
what you eat.
Yeah.
But for people listening who are thinking of making some changes, and you mentioned the building blocks, towards better health, where should they start? Because it can feel quite overwhelming. So in your practice and with your course and with your clients, where do you start? Do you start with diet or do you start elsewhere, or how does that work for you?
That's a great question. So it really, and that's why I personalize to every client that I work with. It really depends on where people are. Their first step may look very different than the next client that I work with. I will say that with everyone, I have in the group programs a curriculum. So they get, before we even have our first appointment, usually a module all about, and it's with a mental health professional, so an expert in her field of how to create a very healthy mind body connection. Because when you have the ability to tune into yourself, be mindful, say, "Ooh, my stress is through the roof right now. I really need to take it down a notch." Or I really need to take a break for deep breathing or a meditation for 5 minutes or get to bed early, then right there, you're getting just a treasure trove of information that sometimes we ignore, especially for people that haven't been feeling well for so long. They are just constantly pushing through to try to accomplish whatever it may be, their family responsibilities, their job. So that's the first step for everyone is let's tune into our body. Let's come up with whatever practices really support reducing that stress response because we can't control the world, but we can control how we react to it. So journaling works for some people, the mindfulness, breathing, whatever it may be. So that's usually my first step. And then I have people that aren't quite ready to make a whole lot of dietary changes. So we start with something small. And some people say, give me everything. I want to jump right in. And maybe they have more support too. And then they are able to make those changes.
Wonderful. And where does food fit into that sort of, food as medicine is something that I know you speak a lot about. So for someone who's listening, who's like, oh, food doesn't really matter too much and it doesn't always count, even though we're saying you are what you eat, but how do we reframe it for people and let them know that, our immune cells and everything, our pain, our energy are all connected to our food, not just inflammation. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think also I really try to stray away from, oh, there's good foods and there's bad foods.
Mm.
Actually, there's foods that are going to boost you along that are quite positive, that are very nourishing, that are giving you a lot of vitamins and minerals. Perhaps protein or fiber, whatever their macro or micronutrients may be. And then there's foods that I wouldn't say are bad. I absolutely hate judgment on people and what they eat. But let's say those foods just aren't as helpful. So they're kind of neutral. You're getting not very much benefit from them. Whereas if you replace it with something, let's say that is a whole food and a more balanced meal, wow, you're getting so much more benefit from that. So usually I try to think in the positive mindset of, okay, let's say we're making the dietary changes. You've got a pretty dramatic example. Let's say someone is eating fast food for all 3 meals, drinking a lot of soda, eating a lot of processed foods, and they're just not in the habit of cooking. So maybe we just switch out the snacks. Maybe instead of a candy bar, we have an apple and a handful of nuts. It's just as fast, there's no prep involved. However, you're getting so much more benefit from that snack than the other.
Yeah, I love that. Adding, not subtracting, and that there
Mm,
isn't the good food and the bad food because that can psychologically have an impact as well and make you feel guilty for having certain things.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I always go by the 80/20, 80/20 kind of plan for the week. 80% of the time I stick to what I can. Yeah. Thank you for
Mhm.
sharing that. And so in terms of these, foods and diets and everything, this we're bombarded with so much information. And how do you, as with your work being a lupus dietitian, how do you, Tanya, sort of navigate this whole world of, miracle diets and, all these different fads that, protein fads or, creatine fads or whatever it might be? How do you, support people with making the right choices for them?
I think in terms of for everyone out there, the best advice that I have is whenever the results promised are completely outsized, that should be a big red flag of, oh, you're going to cure your
Mm,
lupus.
mm,
Unfortunately, all autoimmune diseases do not get cured. They can be in remission for a very, very long time. They can be inactive, but it's just a propensity that your body has. It's already shown that that's a pathway it knows how to go into the direction of. So that I would say is a big red flag. Also check people's credentials. If it is someone that just has the genetic blessing of being a certain body type, whether it's super muscular, super long and lean, super fast. There's if I put 1,000 people in a room and I gave them all the exact same diet, those people's bodies will not miraculously turn into one person's body. That's not how we work. So those would be the red flags. If it's just an influencer that says, well, here's my workout schedule and how I eat, and this is how you're going to feel. But just because they've done it for themselves and they've never had the education or the background, then that would be another red flag. Also, anything that's incredibly restrictive or taking one, let's say, nutrient and kind of going to the moon with it. I have seen some recommendations for an insane amount of protein for people to consume. That would be another red flag. And so, usually, when people ask me questions about that, hi, I've seen this. What do you think? I try to break down, okay, well, here's what that nutrient or here's what that diet is accomplishing. Certainly, I'm not sure if you've seen this out and about, like something like the carnivore diet, where it's just essentially red meat and white water with salt in it. That's not nutritionally complete by any means. So that's a huge red flag. Eating only one type of food, which honestly is pretty inflammatory. In the States, we have the greatest rise of colon cancer amongst very young people because we're not getting enough fiber, because we're not getting enough plants, we're getting too many processed foods and too much red meat, amongst other things. There's lots of other risk factors for this, but for something like that, I would say, ooh, this is very worrisome and I think detrimental to public health.
Gosh, I agree with you, Tanya, on all of those points. Absolutely, yeah. I tend to think with these things, it's the extremes that are the red flags. This, curing the carnivore diets and all of that. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Um, so in terms of different diets and different lifestyles, the cost, location, time.
Mm.
I know you're very passionate about having an inclusive approach to your work. So how does this come about in your practice and in real time?
So with each client, we have a discussion. Okay, what grocery stores are nearby? What other availability do you have? Certainly cost. Groceries have gotten a lot more expensive. So I really like to be mindful of that. There are a lot of cost cutting options. And one of my modules is actually eating healthy on a budget, how we can make really nutritious, simple, fast recipes with things that are not super expensive. On that note, that's another thing that a lot of social media will try to sell you on. Oh, this supplement, this superfood, and it is so expensive. And we don't really, we have superfoods that are very available. We have blueberries, we have broccoli, onions. These are not expensive. They're found in nearly every grocery store and can help you so, so, so much. Um, so I try to be mindful of that, certainly. What's available, bringing up seasonal things, because when you are buying something that has been grown locally and is in season, you're already saving on the cost and it's better for the earth, versus something that was grown miles and miles away. And now you're paying that extra cost of it being imported and transported and out of season. So,
Mm.
um, I try to be cognizant of that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody has different sort of needs and requirements. There might be people with the gluten sensitivity, or they may just not like the taste of certain things, or dairy, or dairy allergy and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot to think about and consider, isn't there? And speaking of that, you've worked with thousands of people. So would you say, the approach that you take to make sure that things are sustainable after somebody's worked with you and that they are able to continue on and help themselves.
Absolutely. So we have every client that I've worked with one-on-one, we have a pretty in-depth conversation of what does your life look like? Where are you preparing your foods? How are you preparing your foods? Are you, let's say, a sort of job where you're traveling 3 days out of the week? How can we make changes that make sense for you? And of course, I ask a lot about what flavors can you not live without? What cuisines are really important to you? Because if we don't fine tune it at the beginning, then anyone can kind of muscle their way through following a diet for a short period of time, but it won't provide that long-term sustainability. So the more that I know and can cater to, so for example, sometimes depending on the person, depending on their recipes, I'll take their recipes that are their favorites or their family's favorites and make the modifications in their meal plan so that we really haven't deviated very much from what they already are doing. We're just making that recipe, again, be that net positive, work harder for them in terms of reducing their inflammation.
That's wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much. We can come on to some case studies a bit later on.
Sure.
But what would you recommend for listeners who are, in the middle of a flare-up? Maybe they're living with something like lupus or an autoimmunity arthritis, and they're thinking, gosh, where do I even start in the kitchen? Do you have any sort of hacks or life tools to recommend for people that they're able to do to eat healthier when, they might be in the middle of a flare or they don't really know where to start?
Absolutely. So it could be that simple change of instead of the candy bar, let's have something whole, like some fresh fruit and nuts. It could be using tools in the kitchen to make it easier. So, for example, certainly hand pain is a common complaint. There's all sorts of choppers, lots of brands do them that you push down with your whole hand. And if even that feels uncomfortable, people can push down with their elbow and it chops the food that way. There are ones that kind of close like this. So, depending on where your joints are hurting, some of those tools can make chopping a lot of vegetables much easier. I always try to encourage people to do things in bulk. So let's say you've got an Instapot, a pressure cooker, a big crock pot, whatever the large container is to cook things with time. Make a big pot of soup. Utilize things like beans that take a long time to cook anyway, but just dump in the other ingredients. It doesn't have to be chopped so perfectly. They'll cook with enough time. And then that way you have leftovers. So I always recommend people freeze them into single servings or double servings. Let's say it's you and your partner. And then that way on a very low energy day, a week later, 2 weeks later, now you can pull out a nice nourishing soup that you had to do zero effort for on that day, and you get to reap the benefits multiple days. Um, so I would definitely suggest that if people can make more of a budget for it. They usually sell, like, let's say, pre-chopped onions, carrots, celery, or chopped vegetables that are frozen. And there's nothing wrong with frozen vegetables. They're often frozen at the peak freshness, and it's easy. It doesn't go bad. So there's less pressure of, oh, I've got to do this recipe right now. So just thinking about those sorts of things usually makes life a lot easier and it feels less overwhelming to just do, let's say, one recipe in bulk, eat it that night, maybe have the leftovers for lunch the next day, and then freeze those leftovers so that you benefit from it next week and the week after.
Absolutely, Tanya. I do this all the
Mm,
time, and it means that I do have a full freezer,
yes.
but it is very, very handy. So, in terms of not just diet, what else beyond food would you say helps people living with autoimmunity and moves the needle and gets them towards, remission and recovery and supporting themselves?
Honestly, I think so many of us are such high achievers and want to accomplish the world. And I think, again, kind of that first step of saying, okay, I need to be more in tune with my body. I'm going to have some restrictions on low days, and I have to make some boundaries. I have to say no to things sometimes. I have to reach out for support. There's so many people that are just, let's say, unpracticed in saying, I need help right now.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
and also giving yourself the forgiveness and the grace of it's okay. Other people are not dealing with this burden. I think a lot of people with autoimmune diseases forget having an autoimmune disease is a part-time job in and of itself. So you've taken on these extra responsibilities. It's normal to feel overwhelmed with family and work and social life and also this autoimmune
mm,
disease.
mm.
It demands a lot.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. And then you want to try and find some joy in your life, and you
Of
think, God,
course.
how am I gonna get to do that? I'm mentioning that because you list joy as a core value in your practice. So why is a positive relationship with our bodies and a focus on joy a biological necessity for our healing and overall well-being?
I always think of this. I do not want to look back in hopefully my 90s and think, "Ugh, why didn't I do the thing?" I never want to look back with regrets. So, clinically, laughter reduces cortisol. I saw a study recently that it reduces cortisol 37% more than the other, like, pleasant activities. So, one, it is actually making a biochemical change in your body, which is amazing. But also, like, what is life without joy and whimsy and finding the things that just brighten your day? But I will say I've had to reel myself in because I am certainly one that I don't like to say no to anything. I want all the new experiences. I feel like life is just amazing and there's so many things to learn and to do. For example, we went roller skating the other day and it was so fun. I haven't done that in years. And if like I don't it, the I will never not do something if I have the energy and the ability to do it because I feel like those memories are what makes life full and beautiful.
I could not agree with you more. Could not agree with you more. Making time for joy is so important, even if it's something small, even if it's simply, sitting on the sofa and, doing some coloring, it could just be as
Absolutely.
simple as that, but the
Yeah,
roller skating sounds very fun.
it
That
was
sounds
fun.
very fun. So Tanya, I'd love to move on now to your sort of case studies, if you're able to share, obviously client confidentiality, mentioning no names, but if you could share some case studies where people have worked with you and, done these anti-inflammatory methods and lifestyle changes that I also speak about and, advocate for, yeah, and how it changed their lives.
I have a lot of examples. I think one of my most favorite because she was so committed to it. And she also wanted the time and the energy for joy in her life. That was where she was aiming for. So before we met, she was essentially almost bedbound, just so fatigued. She had, thankfully, the coincidence of having a work from home job. So she was able to work from the couch, work from the bed, and maintain that same position. But it was just so amazing when we implemented all of the things, how much her energy came back. And she was super active, is super active, loves to go hiking and spend time outdoors. And that was such an integral part of her relationship with the world and things that really light up her soul and life. And so just to see this transition from really being so sequestered and stuck inside to literally spreading her wings and getting back outside. And then the main goal when we started working together was to um, get her into remission and off of certain medications so that she could try to become pregnant. And she did. And now she has a healthy baby girl. And it's just so amazing to see how many doors open when people are able to make these changes and again, find that path that feels sustainable, because then when you see all the benefits and you're really getting access to this quality of life again, it doesn't feel hard to continue. People are so motivated because it's like, well, the results are tangible. They're so great.
Oh, that's just so wonderful to hear. And it just, yeah, changing lives. This work really, really changes lives. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's just absolutely beautiful. Yeah. So Tanya, at the end of every episode, I always like to end by asking that one thing. What's the one key takeaway or message for listeners that you'd like them to walk away and remember?
Obviously, I'm an advocate for food as medicine. I'm so passionate about explaining the science behind it to people, really finding the path forward that feels like something that they can stick with. Because the biggest takeaway is even when you're in the midst of a flare and you feel as though like I'm in so much pain, I am so tired, I can only like crawl my way through, that there is so much hope. Certainly in the medication realm, I think the landscape for lupus has come leaps and bounds in the last 20 years. The access to so many other options is so much better. So that alone is fantastic. But also in the day to day, just as we kind of tallied up how many decisions that you're making that affect your health in a negative or a positive way, you have that control. You can not only advocate for yourself, but really take little bits throughout the day and you get to make the decision. Is this going to be a positive thing for my health? Or, hey, I'm really tired. This one's just going to be neutral today. So don't ever feel as though you are not empowered to make those changes. Sometimes it is just a question of which changes do we need to make, but that living with lupus is not, it doesn't have to be all that you think of. That umbrella lupus doesn't have to shadow on everything else in your life. You can have a beautiful, full life and also be diagnosed with lupus.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Tanya, for sharing your knowledge today on the Live Well with Arthritis podcast. And to finish up, where can people find you?
Sure. So you can find me on all the social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all as the Lupus Dietitian. Of course, if anyone out there is interested in assistance with your diet and your lifestyle, please reach out to me, and I'm happy to answer questions as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Tanya, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you so much. It was truly a pleasure.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Tanya. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye. You've been listening to the Live Well with Arthritis podcast. If you're enjoying it, please follow and leave a review. I'd really love to hear from you. To sign up to the waitlist for the Live Well with Arthritis course, head to livewellwitharthritis.com/waitlist. For any questions or to suggest topics, email us over on hello@livewellwitharthritis.com. You can follow me over on @arthritisfoodie, that's ARTHRITISFOODIE. And you can also follow Live Well with Arthritis on @livewellwitharthritis to stay tuned for the latest updates, news, podcast episodes, recipes, and a whole lot more. I'll see you there. Until next time, live well and lots of love from me to you. P.S. Before you go, I have to let you know that this podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of your medical professional, whether that be your rheumatologist, GP, specialist, or other qualified professional. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.